Hey, welcome to Southern Trace Camping, where today we're going to be replacing some leaf spring shackles. Anytime I do a repair, I want to try to share it so that maybe it'll help someone else, maybe save you some money and show you that you can probably do it yourself. This is a little bit of a tough job, but it's not too terrible. I had a leaf spring shackle that kind of broke apart on me. I found it when I was changing a tire. Here's a little picture of what that looks like. I never noticed or paid much attention to my suspension. I was always checking my lug nuts and tire pressure and things like that, and it kind of caught me off guard when I caught that shackle being broke like that. I'm thankful that I caught it and I didn't have a come apart on the side of the highway. But last night I did the first side, which you can see that side over there is shiny. I did that as a test run last night, and I'm glad that I did because it took me about 3 hours to do one side. But I was going slow, double checking everything, and as always, the first time you do something is always the slowest. So I wanted to share with you what I learned and what you will need to do this job. First, before we get into what you need to do for the job, I wanted to show you that I went with this heavy duty shackle upgrade. It's from MORryde. This is the size of the shackle that comes standard on your trailer. I mean, I think that's a quarter, maybe even a little less, and this is what you're beefing up to. So it's a major upgrade. And you'll notice these shackles have a grease zert on the bolt, and there's your grease hole where the grease will come out, and these are your brass bushings. Now it's a major upgrade, and here's some of the stuff that I found last night. You will need to take off whatever tire it is on the axle that you're going to be working on. You can leave the other one on just as a support in case something goes wrong, but we'll cover that in a second. You can take on the shackle side, you can actually cut these bolt heads off. Now let me back up and say that I did try to get them off regular with just a wrench, end wrenches, and sockets. I couldn't budge them. They're seized up in there pretty good. You might get lucky if you have an air impact and get those off of there. Most of the videos I've seen, guys had to cut those off. So here's my tip on that. On these, you can cut the heads off. But when you go to take this bolt out and replace that, which by the way, you get extra bolts. They send an extra 4 bolts to cover those on each end of the trailer. When you do this one, you need to cut the nut side off, the back side, and here's why. This bolt has a shoulder on it, a spline shoulder. So even if you cut that head off of there, you've still got to drive those splines all the way through. But you're not just driving it through this one. When it comes to this side, you're going to have to drive it through that side too. And just don't ask me how I know that. That was part of the 3 hours. So know that you can cut those 2 heads off, but on this side of the leaf spring, you'll need to cut the nut off from the inside. Okay, so what you'll need to do for your trailer is you're gonna want to put all your slide outs in, because you're gonna have to lift it up about 10 inches or so to get the weight off of your suspension. So you don't want, like on my trailer, I have 3 slide outs on the other side. If I lift this side up, that puts a whole bunch of extra weight leaning out even further over the slide outs, which in theory, I guess it could fall over. I didn't want to test that theory, so I pulled all my slide outs in. That way you have the majority of your weight between the frames. Okay, so I went back near the back of the trailer and I used a bottle jack and jacked it up and got all the weight off of the suspension, just enough where the tires are just barely rubbing the ground. And let me back up. Before you do that, go ahead on this, whatever side you're going to be working on, and loosen your lug nuts. That way you can take them off easier once the weight is off the tires. So I put a jack there, put a jack stand under there, came up here, did the same thing with a bottle jack, jacked it up on the frame. That jack stand to the right is not actually touching anything. It's just there in case something were to go wrong with the bottle jack. Then you're going to need a floor jack. Okay, the floor jack is just, I put very, very little pressure on that axle. I mean, it barely is touching it. It's more for support once I take the brackets out. When you do the brackets, I would do one at a time. take that one apart, get it reassembled, and then do this one. That way that's always attached and the axle really can't fall too far. Even if something were to go wrong, your floor jack were to move or whatever, you've still got a bolt holding the leaf spring, which is essentially holding the axle as well. So the tools that you will need, you'll need some good hammers to help drive some of the stuff through, maybe some punches to help punch some of the stuff out, so a drill and a drill bit, and some screwdrivers. Okay, now here's what I have found. In these shackles, they were plastic bushings. Easy, man. You just take a screwdriver, get underneath it, fold it in, grab it with pliers, pull it out. This was a different story. That section there had these little brass bushings. They're about a, I don't know, ½ inch wide, each one of them. Well, this one came out real easy. I just did the same thing, took a screwdriver, drove the screwdriver in, broke it apart, and then eventually it collapsed in, and I was able to pull it out. The back side, on this side, was a pain in the butt. That sucker would not come out. I tried bolts, driving it through, hole punches, tried driving screwdriver edges through it to try to break it apart. That dude would not come apart at all. And I bet you I spent an hour just messing with that one little bushing trying to get it out of there. And I don't know why I didn't think of this earlier, but that is why I have the drill. It's copper. It's super soft. I just went in there and basically drilled it out, or made it so thin that a screwdriver would then break it down. So, you know, hindsight's 20/20. I should have thought of that right away. Instead, I spent an hour, you know, knocking the fire out of it with a hammer and all different kinds of stuff. And anyway, so that's a little helpful tip. You may need a hand grinder with a cutting wheel, and then you'll need your mask and safety glasses. And last but not least, this, if you've never used it, is WD-40 Spray and Stay gel lubricant. Is awesome to put on your brakes, your rim studs, so that when you put your rim back on there, when you put your nuts back on there, next time you go to take them off, they should glide off much easier. That stuff is incredible, and it stays very, very well. So anyway, that is the gist of it. Now, the floor jack, you might be wondering also, that'll help you when you need to go realign all your bolt holes. You can just give it a little bit of pressure here and there and line it back up. I had no problems lining the shackle up. When I took this one out, I needed an extra set of hands to kind of push the bolt through. I could get everything lined up with 2 hands using the jack and pulling on the axle, but I didn't have a third hand to put that through. So you might need a third hand to put that last bolt in there. Anyway, I hope this helps, and I may come back with you here in just a second if I find out anything new while I do this second suspension. Oh yeah, and you're going to need a grease gun so that you can grease all of your fittings once you get it all up there. So, forgot about the grease gun. Alright, let's do this second job. Okay, so here I am on the second job. The first shackle went in pretty flawlessly. I still had problems with one bushing. Still had to drill it out. One of the brass bushings just would not budge. Drilled it out, took about 3 minutes, no problem. When you go to put these full length bushings back in there, just take your time tapping them in. You might even spray some of that WD-40 Stay in there. Actually, it's such a tight fit, you might even drill it just a hair, just to kind of smooth it out. I did a little bit, and it still took me about 5 minutes to just keep working that thing to get it all the way in. But what I'm wanting to show you now, this side went smooth also. Cut the nut off of this side, it popped right out. Literally took a minute and a half. But you can see the bushing isn't lining up. I brought in a second floor jack to kind of help guide this in, and this is as close as what I can get it. Height wise, I know I'm right. So what I did, took a Phillips head screwdriver, and you can use that as your pry bar. It's just a little, about 25% stuck in there, and as you push on it, it brings that. I don't know if you saw it move or not, but it'll line that up. And so what I'll do on this side is I'll be ready with this bolt. So I'll pry on the screwdriver, prying it back, pulling this forward, and then push that in. But what I wanted to show you that is so that you're gonna have to keep barely tweaking these jacks just right. I mean, little bitty movements to get those holes to line up just perfect. And once that is done, this side will be totally done. So hopefully 45 minutes to an hour by the time you put the wheel back on. So anyway, thought that might help you. Okay, so I got the bolt started, and I couldn't get it in very far because it stopped because there's still awkward pressure. So you just take a regular punch or whatever you may have, and you just start working around it, just hitting here, 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 using a hammer. Now remember, you've got these splines. You can see them right there. Those splines are going to hit this ear, and when they do, it's going to want to stop. You need to go ahead and use your punch and hammer and go ahead and drive that all the way through so that this bolt head is flush on this ear. Alright. Okay, so I'm right at about 50 minutes on this little job here now that I know what I'm doing. On these, just a note, you want to snug them up, but you don't want to make them too terribly tight because they have to pivot some. So I would make them tight and then back it off about a half a turn so that they're just snug. On this one over here, I tighten them pretty, I would say snug, not extremely tight, but pretty dang snug, because that's how they were. And from what I've read, that's what you want to do on, I'm going to call that the anchor bolt. You want that one pretty tight. So just thought I'd throw that little note in there.